for the hardest-hitting show in talk radio. The true progressive voice since 2012. This is Southpaws.
Dangerous assault on American constitutional democracy that took place on January 6, 2021 consists of hundreds of individual criminal offenses. Most such crimes are already being prosecuted by the Department of Justice. We propose to the committee advancing referrals where the gravity of the specific offense, the severity of its actual harm, and the centrality of the offender to the overall design of the unlawful scheme to overthrow the election compel us to speak. Ours is not a system of justice where foot soldiers go to jail and the masterminds and ringleaders get a free pass.
And the voice you hear is Representative Jamie Raskin, Democrat of Maryland, a member of the January 6th committee, as he refers charges against Donald Trump and others to the Justice Department. And that's going to be our big topic for today. Welcome to Southpaws on the Pacifica Radio Network. We are the leaders of the revolution. I'm Darren Gibson. We'll talk about the January 6th committee. We also want to talk about a story out of New York City, protesters going out against a drag story hour for kids. They've gone a little further than what your normal protest would. So we'll talk about that. And Elon Musk wins hammer time yet again. We'll tell you why in just a little bit. Before we get started with today's show, a couple of reminders. You can follow us on social media by going to facebook.com/Southpaws Radio Show. You can find us on YouTube by doing a search for Southpaws Radio. You can find us on Tumblr at southpawsradioshow.tumblr.com. And you can find us at Mastodon by doing a search for Southpaws Radio. And I want to take this moment right now to let everybody know we are at this point temporarily suspending posts to our Twitter account in solidarity with the journalists who have been shadow banned and banned from Twitter for reporting on Elon Musk. So we will not be posting links to our Twitter account for the time being. Once all the journalists have been restored in full to their account, then we might reconsider. And I hope the government does a nice deep dive into breaking up all these social media companies. It is beyond time. With that said, let me go ahead and continue our introduction. You can become a patron of the show by going to patreon.com/Southpaws Radio. You can listen to the show anytime at Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Podcast Addict, Podvine, and Pandora by doing a search for Southpaws. Once you found our logo, you found us. We send links to our weekly episodes to our Facebook, Tumblr, YouTube, and Mastodon accounts. You can listen to us on Global Community Radio Channel 1 every Saturday night at 11 Eastern. And you can listen to us on great Pacifica stations, including KCEI in Taos, New Mexico, KZGM in Kabul, Missouri, and KEPJ in San Antonio, Texas. So be sure to listen to us there. I also want to give a nice shout out to my old friend Christian at WLRI in Pennsylvania. So he took our show a couple of weeks ago. I hope you air us, Christian. I know that you like to have a little shorter show because of breaks and everything, but we have to appeal to the masses. All right. Before we get started, we are recording this show early on Wednesday, December 21st, 2022. A massive blizzard is heading to Michigan. We are actually now under a blizzard warning that will start at 4 p.m. the afternoon of Thursday, December 22nd. So I'm getting this show done early and getting it uploaded because we're going to be hit big time. They're talking 10 to 20 inches of snow, blowing snow, bad travel conditions for Friday and Saturday. So if you need to get to Grandma's house for Christmas, you better do it now, because it's going to be ugly. This is probably going to be one of the worst storms that we have had in Michigan, probably since the big 1978 blizzard. So we'll go from there. Let's get to our first story. This is Scott Wong and Alex Seist-Wald writing for NBC News. This is dated December 19th out of Washington. As you heard from our special intro, the House January 6th committee voted Monday to recommend the Justice Department pursue a batch of criminal charges against Donald Trump for his role in an effort to overturn the 2020 election and the fomenting of a deadly mob at the Capitol. Trump was the first president in American history to be impeached twice. Now he is also the first president ever to be formally referred by Congress for potential criminal prosecution. The Select Committee also took aim at Trump's top allies on and off Capitol Hill, who worked with Trump to block certification of President Joe Biden's victory and to illegitimately keep Donald Trump in power. I'm going to go ahead and play our next clip once again. This is Representative Jamie Raskin, Democrat of Maryland, requesting charges against Trump. So take a listen to this, folks. This runs just under 6 minutes. This is really good stuff here.
Mr. Chairman, as you know, our committee had the opportunity last spring to present much of our evidence to a federal judge, something that distinguishes our investigation from any other congressional investigation I can recall. In the context of resolving evidentiary privilege issues related to the crime-fraud doctrine in the Eastman case, U.S. District Court Judge David Carter examined just a small subset of our evidence to determine whether it showed the likely commission of a federal offense. The judge concluded that both former President Donald Trump and John Eastman likely violated 2 federal criminal statutes. This is the starting point for our analysis today. The first criminal statute we invoke for referral, therefore, is Title 18, Section 1512C, which makes it unlawful for anyone to corruptly obstruct, influence, or impede any official proceeding of the United States government. We believe that the evidence described by my colleagues today and assembled throughout our hearings warrants a criminal referral of former President Donald J. Trump, John Eastman, and others for violations of this statute. The whole purpose and obvious effect of Trump's scheme were to obstruct, influence, and impede this official proceeding, the central moment for the lawful transfer of power in the United States. Second, we believe that there is more than sufficient evidence to refer former President Donald J. Trump, John Eastman, and others for violating Title 18, Section 371. This statute makes it a crime to conspire to defraud the United States. In other words, to make an agreement to impair, obstruct, or defeat the lawful functions of the United States government by deceitful or dishonest means. Former President Trump did not engage in a plan to defraud the United States acting alone. He entered into agreements, formal and informal, with several other individuals who assisted him with his criminal objectives. Our report describes in detail the actions of numerous co-conspirators who agreed with and participated in Trump's plan to impair, obstruct, and defeat the certification of President Biden's electoral victory. That said, the subcommittee does not attempt to determine all of the potential participants in this conspiracy, as our understanding of the role of many individuals may be incomplete even today because they refuse to answer our questions. We trust that the Department of Justice will be able to form a far more complete picture through its own investigation. Third, We make a referral based on Title 18, Section 1001, which makes it unlawful to knowingly and willfully make materially false statements to the federal government. The evidence clearly suggests that President Trump conspired with others to submit slates of fake electors to Congress and the National Archives. We believe that this evidence we set forth in our report is more than sufficient for a criminal referral of former President Donald J. Trump and others in connection with this offense. As before, we don't try to determine all of the participants in this conspiracy, many of whom refuse to answer our questions while under oath. We trust that the Department of Justice will be able to form a more complete picture through its own investigation. The fourth and final statute we invoke for referral is Title 18, Section 2383. The statute applies to anyone who incites, assists, or engages in insurrection against the United States of America, and anyone who gives aid or comfort to an insurrection. An insurrection is a rebellion against the authority of the United States. It is a grave federal offense anchored in the Constitution itself, which repeatedly opposes insurrections and domestic violence, and indeed uses participation in insurrection by office holders as automatic grounds for disqualification from ever holding public office again at the federal or state level. Anyone who incites others to engage in rebelling, assists them in doing so, or gives aid and comfort to those engaged in insurrection is guilty of a federal crime. The committee believes that more than sufficient evidence exists for a criminal referral of former President Trump for assisting or aiding and comforting those at the Capitol who engaged in a violent attack on the United States. The committee has developed significant evidence that President Trump intended to disrupt the peaceful transition of power under our Constitution. The president has an affirmative and primary constitutional duty to act to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. Nothing could be a greater betrayal of this duty than to assist in insurrection against the constitutional order. The complete factual basis for this referral is set forth in detail throughout our report.
And that was once again Representative Jamie Raskin, Democrat of Maryland, laying out the charges that the committee is referring to the Department of Justice for criminal prosecution of Donald Trump and Trump attorney John Eastman. From the NBC News story, the committee said that John Eastman, the attorney, was the architect of the scheme to pressure then Vice President Mike Pence to reject the state's electoral votes on January 6th and have fake electors submitted to Congress instead. One of those states where there was a slate of fake electors was Michigan. We've talked about it on this show. A couple of people who were originally supposed to be fake electors decided it probably wasn't a good idea and drop out. One of those was former Michigan Secretary of State Republican candidate Terry Lynn Land. And I'm glad that she is out of politics for now. She should be in jail, in my opinion. Let me go ahead and play our next clip here. Raskin also has referred 4 Republican representatives to the House Ethics Committee for not following through and testifying in front of Congress, basically ignoring subpoenas by the committee. Take a listen to this, folks. This runs about a minute and a half.
We asked multiple members of Congress to speak with us about issues critical to our understanding of this attack on the 2020 election and our system of constitutional democracy. None agreed to provide that essential information. As a result, we took the significant step of issuing them subpoenas based on the volume of information particular members possessed about one or more parts of President Trump's plans to overturn the election. None of the subpoenaed members complied, and we are now referring 4 members of Congress for appropriate sanction by the House Ethics Committee for failure to comply with lawful subpoenas. Mr. Chairman, we understand the gravity of each and every referral we are making today, just as we understand the magnitude of the crime against democracy that we describe in our report. But we have gone where the facts and the law lead us, and inescapably, they lead us here. Accordingly, Mr. Chairman, in light of these facts, I ask unanimous consent that the chairman be directed to transmit to the United States Department of Justice relevant Select Committee records in furtherance of these criminal referrals.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I now yield back.
And that was Chairman Benny Thompson of the January 6th Select Committee, authorizing the charges be sent to the Department of Justice. The 4 members of Congress who are being referred to the House Ethics Committee for defying the subpoenas include House Minority Leader and potential incoming Speaker of the House Kevin McCarthy, Republican of California, Representative Jim Jordan of Ohio, who's expected to be the next chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, Andy Biggs, Republican of Arizona, and Scott Perry, Republican of Pennsylvania. And getting back to the NBC News story, Raskin said there may be others worthy of prosecution and there may be other statutes that Trump violated, noting that the Justice Department will be able to form a far more complete picture through its own ongoing investigation. Committee Chairman Representative Benny Thompson, Democrat of Mississippi, said, quote, "This committee is nearing the end of its work, but as a country, we remain in strange and uncharted waters. We've never had a president of the United States stir up a violent attempt to block the transfer of power. If we are to survive as a nation of laws and democracy, this can never happen again." End of quote. I totally agree. This marks the first time in history that a congressional committee has recommended that the Department of Justice launch a criminal investigation into a former American president. The January 6th committee is urging Department of Justice to consider a number of charges against Trump, which we've heard in the sound bites here, including conspiracy to defraud the federal government, obstruction of an official proceeding, in this case Congress's certification of electoral votes, conspiracy to make a false statement, and inciting or assisting those in an insurrection. You know what I'd charge him with? Treason, because that's just exactly what it is. This is treason. The criminal referrals do not carry any legal weight but represent a symbolic rebuke of Trump, who remains the most influential Republican in the country and has launched another bid for president in 2024. Jack Smith, the independent special counsel appointed by Attorney General Merrick Garland, is already investigating Trump on numerous fronts, including for his role in the January 6th treasonous riot. I added treasonous because that's exactly what it is. The committee used its final hearing to summarize the key investigatory threads from its 9 previous hearings and to stitch them together into a case against Trump. Committee co-chair Representative Liz Cheney, Republican of Wyoming, said of Trump, quote, "At the heart of our republic is the guarantee of the peaceful transfer of power. Every president in our history has accepted this peaceful transfer of power except one." End of quote. Cheney said that among the most shameful findings of the committee was that Trump sat in the White House watching the violence unfold on TV on January 6th, but did nothing, even as advisors and allies begged him to call off the rioters. Cheney said of Trump's inaction, quote, "This was an utter moral failure. No man who would behave that way at that moment in time can ever serve in any position of authority in our nation again. He is unfit for any office." End of quote. Witnesses, most of them Republicans, testified to the January 6th panel that Trump and his inner circle had furiously worked to sow doubt about Joe Biden's legitimate election victory. They testified that Trump launched a multi-pronged campaign to pressure state officials, senior Justice Department officials, and Vice President Mike Pence to help overturn the election. They said Trump directed a mob of thousands of his supporters to march on the Capitol to disrupt lawmakers from certifying the results of the election. And the witnesses, which included many former Trump White House aides, said he refused to call off his supporters as they brutally assaulted police officers and stormed the halls of Congress while chaining threats to hang Mike Pence and target lawmakers by name. Trump recently took to his Truth Social platform to slam the January 6th investigators as, quote, corrupt cowards who hate this country, end of quote. You know he's actually talking about himself, right? But that's what Republicans do. When they talk about others, they're really talking about themselves. The House impeached him for his role in the attack, but he was acquitted by the Senate, and he is now running again for president in 2024. The report represents the culmination of an 18-month congressional investigation that included more than 100 subpoenas, interviews with more than 1,200 witnesses, and the collection of hundreds of thousands of documents. Most transcripts from those depositions and voluntary interviews, as well as other written and video evidence, will also be shared with the public. Outgoing Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Democrat of California, who was targeted during the attack and who created the January 6th committee, said, quote, with painstaking detail, this executive summary documents the sinister plot to subvert the Congress, shred the Constitution, and halt the peaceful transfer of power. The committee has reached important conclusions about the evidence it has developed, and I respect those findings, end of quote. Like past reports on the John F. Kennedy assassination and the September 11th terrorist attacks, the January 6th report will be zipped off to numerous book publishers and is expected to become an instant bestseller. But Chair Thompson said his report will be different in one significant way. The committee first will release it digitally, which will allow the panel to link to evidence that can provide the public with greater context. Thompson told reporters, quote, whereas other reports have just been a bunch of pages, we think the digital part will add another dimension to it, end of quote. During the hearing, Thompson also spoke directly to the American people, saying they will now decide on accountability for Trump's actions as he seeks the White House once again. During the hearing, Thompson said, quote, the future of our democracy rests in your hands. It's up to the people of this country to decide who deserves the public trust, who will put fidelity to the Constitution and democracy above all else, who will abide by the rule of law, no matter the outcome. End of quote. You know, and he's got a point. This has not been a very good week for Trump. This is great stuff here. I actually want to read this piece. This is a piece that was published online by Jay Kuo, who is the CEO and founder of The Social Edge. He is also a composer, lyricist, playwright, and author. Here's what he wrote. This was published on Facebook. The headline, 2 pieces of the coup puzzle just fell into place. There was a Friday evening news dump of sorts on the January 6th investigation, so I'm providing a rare Saturday update on what went down in federal court and why it matters to the bigger picture. To understand Friday's legal development a bit better, we first need to rewind to events of this past summer. On August 10, 2022, federal investigators seized the cell phone of Representative Scott Perry, Republican of Pennsylvania, a close Trump ally in Congress. And by the way, we should once again mention one of the 4 members of Congress being referred to the House Ethics Committee for ignoring congressional subpoenas to testify. This followed on the June 2022 seizures of phones owned by 2 suspected coup plotters, Department of Justice official Jeffrey Clark and Trump lawyer John Eastman. Investigators had also recovered documents from Department of Justice official Ken Klukowski, who was working with Clark to overturn the election but is now cooperating with prosecutors. The seizures set off alarm bells in Trumpland because they meant that 1 or more federal judges had signed off on the search warrants. That meant the department had established that there was probable cause to believe crimes had been committed and that evidence of those crimes could be found on those electronic devices. After that flurry of activity, there was no further news about those phones and what communications they or the other devices of these Trump allies contained. Until yesterday. Late Friday, at the request of the Justice Department, the Honorable Beryl A. Howell, Chief Justice of the Federal District Court in Washington, D.C., unsealed 2 earlier orders she had issued. While the orders remain partially redacted, they reveal some important behind-the-scenes information. Investigators had seized the documents from lawyers and a sitting Congress member, so per protocol, a filter team at the Department of Justice had been reviewing the documents for any potential attorney, client, or work product privileges. The apt name of the filter team raised a chuckle: Project Coconut. Following the review, the Trump allies sought to prevent the turning over of certain evidence, but in two rather scathing orders, Judge Howell ordered them released to investigators. The orders revealed the extent of the emails that the investigators had retrieved from these Trump allies, amounting to over 130,000 documents. But it's always interesting to see which documents among so many tens of thousands the parties seem to care most about, so much so that they will file motions to prevent or force their disclosure. Among these were 37 documents comprising communications and attachments involving Representative Perry's email address and 331 versions of what appear to be an autobiography outline auto-saved to Jeffrey Clark's Google account. Let's take a look briefly at each of those. We don't yet know the precise substance of Representative Perry's emails and attached documents, but we know some general contours from the non-redacted parts of one of Judge Howell's orders. Remember that Perry was the Trump ally who introduced Jeffrey Clark to Trump and had suggested that Clark be made head of the Department of Justice in the waning days of the Trump presidency, a plan considered but ultimately rejected by Trump because of the threat of mass department resignations should he do so. According to the unsealed orders, Perry was in communication with Klukowski 8 days after the election regarding a document entitled Electors Clause, the Legislature Option. That document advanced the independent state legislature theory, a rather wild legal Hail Mary that insists that, under our Constitution, the state legislatures should have the final say on presidential elections. That idea, in turn, was key to Clark's infamous draft letter to Georgia legislators, which sought falsely to convey that the Department of Justice was still investigating widespread election fraud. That letter was intended to persuade the legislators to come back into session and declare the election for Trump. Perry was also in frequent phone contact with Eastman in the weeks before January 6th and via email in February 2021, but the contents of those calls and emails remain non-public. Perry's communications with the coup plotters raised the possibility that he is at least an important witness, if not himself a co-conspirator, to the Trump White House plot to overturn the election. Perry happens also to head the far-right House Freedom Caucus, a powerful faction within the GOP that holds the keys to whether Representative Kevin McCarthy has enough votes to become Speaker next month. The emails reveal that Perry has a deep conflict of interest, one of which may help explain his efforts to demand, as concessions from McCarthy in exchange for his support, that Congress conduct investigations into the January 6th committee and impeach Attorney General Merrick Garland. After all, Perry may be the subject of a criminal investigation or a key material witness to several crimes and will want to discredit the committee and the department as his own involvement in the coup plot becomes clearer. A common and frankly bizarre habit of Trump allies is to write books about their lives and their self-perceived heroism right in the midst of ongoing criminal investigations. Jeffrey Clark was no exception, having apparently begun an outline for a book in October of 2021 about his own life and, in particular, his role at the department, even during the critical post-election day 2020 period. Clark tried to stop investigators from using copies of this outline, but the judge was having none of it, even noting with palpable disdain that Clark's arguments amounted to, quote, throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks, end of quote. If there is a common theme to the sprawling January 6th investigation, it appears to be food thrown upon walls. That's a great line. Oh, gosh. The Clark autobiography outline has at least one very notable and relevant section about the infamous Georgia letter to legislators. Clark writes that in the winter of 2020, he showed the letter to Trump himself. If Clark were appointed Attorney General, he would then send two Georgia lawmakers advising falsely that the Department of Justice investigation of fraud rendered the election in the state inconclusive. Clark wrote that Trump had replied, quote, good letter, end of quote. These two words could provide a key link for prosecutors not only in D.C., but in Fulton County, Georgia, where a grand jury is weighing indictments for election interference. Clark has now stated in writing that Trump saw and approved of his draft letter to the Georgia legislators, one that contained such demonstrably false claims that acting Attorney General Jeffrey Rosen dismissed it outright, and one that would have upended the entire election in the state. That means Trump's fingers are on the evidence, too. When proving a conspiracy case, this is the kind of evidence that shows there was a criminal plan that the parties agreed to and took action to further. It is the kind of evidence that Clark will be hard-pressed to deny because he wrote those words himself. I can't help but wonder if the department moved specifically to unseal the earlier Howell orders at this time because it believed other investigators, both in Congress and Atlanta, should have this evidence before them in advance of possible criminal referrals and indictments. The final day of hearings by the January 6th committee is Monday, and the committee may wish to make strong points about Scott Perry's extensive involvement in the coup plot and the good letter acknowledgement by Donald Trump. I love it. This is great. This is fantastic. And I think Jay brings up some very good points there. We will see what happens with the Department of Justice and this investigation. Right now, let's go ahead to our next story. This is from NBC News, New York. This is dated December 19th. We have the original story, and then we have a scary update to it. Protesters trying to shut down a reading event geared toward neurodiverse children at a branch of the New York City Public Library were met by a wall of counter-protesters. The standoff over the Drag Story Hour event, a popular national storytelling program where drag performers read children's books at libraries, schools, and bookstores, took place outside the Andrew High School Braille and Talking Book Library in Manhattan's Chelsea neighborhood on Saturday. The event was billed as story time with local drag performers adapted to be more accessible to kids with autism and other disabilities. Saturday's protest was just the latest in a string of standoffs across the country from a fringe movement targeting drag events over unsubstantiated allegations of grooming. The group demonstrating on Saturday brought handmade signs covering a spectrum of issues with messages protesting everything from fascism to grooming to gender identity. Yeah, these people are just out of their minds. New York City Council member Eric Botcher shared images and videos online of the protesters, some of whom he tried speaking with before entering the children's reading event. In a video shared on Twitter, Botcher said, quote, "I want to show you the face of hate right here in Chelsea," end of quote. He later showed video of counter-protesters clad in rainbows. A representative for the New York Public Library said the event went on as planned and added that the library would continue to offer programs supporting diverse voices. The representative said, quote, "This is particularly important at this moment when we are seeing a rise of hate and violence targeting LGBTQ plus communities," end of quote. Well, we have an update to that story. This was published by NBC News New York on December 20th. This is where it gets scary, folks. Protesters upset over a reading event for children that featured drag artists at a New York public library allegedly vandalized the home of a Manhattan council member who showed his support for the LGBTQ-friendly event. New York City Council member Eric Botcher, who represents Chelsea, said 2 people were arrested after they got inside his apartment building Monday night. A group of protesters first entered a building on West 30th Street around 3 p.m., according to police, and graffitied the walls of an office. In an incident 2 hours later that police said was connected, a group was outside the building on West 24th Street where Botcher lives when 2 women allegedly entered the residence. Police said that the 2 women, 44-year-old Erica Sanchez and 27-year-old Anna Morgan, were arrested after they were found inside the building. Both women were charged with criminal mischief. Botcher shared images of the chalk graffiti written outside his building, which called him a groomer and a child pedophile. He said in a tweet, quote, "This is pure hate unmasked. If they think this is going to intimidate us, they're mistaken. Our resolve is strengthened," end of quote. New York City Mayor Eric Adams condemned the vandalism and praised the lawmaker. In a tweet, Adams said, quote, "This is outrageous, completely outrageous. Eric, you stand up for our city every single day, and these cowardly bigots have no place here. Thank you to the NYPD for your quick work and sending the message that this hate will not go unchallenged." End of quote. The vandalism is the latest attempt from a fringe movement targeting drag events over unsubstantiated allegations of grooming. It comes 2 days after protesters tried to shut down a public reading event geared toward neurodiverse children at a city library, but were met by a wall of LGBTQ supporters who showed up in support of the drag artists hosting the story hour. The standoff outside the Andrew High School Braille and Talking Book Library in Chelsea on Saturday was over a children's event billed as story time with local drag performers adapted to be more accessible to kids with autism and other disabilities. The New York Public Library said, quote, "A group of protesters attempted to disrupt a drag story hour for neurodiverse children. The story hour went on as planned, including readings, coloring activities, and a dance party at the end. This is particularly important at this moment when we are seeing a rise of hate and violence targeting LGBTQ plus communities." End of quote. The rise in anti-LGBTQ rhetoric raises concerns about escalating acts of violence. It was only last month that a gunman opened fire inside a queer nightclub in Colorado Springs, killing 5 people and wounding 17 others. And I'll just repeat something that I said on this show a couple of weeks ago. And it's that members of the straight media are not really covering this well. In particular, a New York Times story worrying more about people from the Antifa movement showing up in arms, and by arms I'm talking about firearms, protecting these events from these nut jobs that are saying, oh, they're grooming children to become queer, they're doing this, they're doing that, they're doing the other. No, they're not. They're trying to read to children, which is something that you conservatives need to learn to do, which is to read, because apparently your cognition skills are not very well. Oh, they're just trying to groom all these children. No, if you want your children groomed, take them to the Catholic Church. Sorry, I said it. I don't care. It's Christmas. I don't care. It's the truth. And I'll tell you what, I'm going to lay out some more truth to you folks, courtesy of the late, great George Carlin. I'm going to play a couple Carlin clips today. Here's one that we don't play nearly enough on this show. This is George Carlin discussing that your rights are an illusion. And they really are. He says that one of two things are true. We either have unlimited rights or we have no rights at all. And he's leaning toward no rights. And he explains why in this clip. Take a listen to this, folks.
Boy, everyone in this country is always running around yammering about their fucking rights. I have a right. You have no right. We have a right. They don't have a right. Folks, I hate to spoil your fun, but there's no such thing as rights, okay? They're imaginary. We made them up, like the boogeyman. The Three Little Pigs, Pinocchio, Mother Goose, shit like that. Rights are an idea. They're just imaginary. They're a cute idea. Cute. But that's all. Cute and fictional. But if you think you do have rights, let me ask you this. Where do they come from? People say, well, they come from God. They're God-given rights. Oh, here we go again. Here we go again. The God excuse. The last refuge of a man with no answers and no argument. It came from God. Anything we can't describe must have come from God. Personally, folks, I believe that if your rights came from God, he would have given you the right to some food every day, and he would have given you the right to a roof over your head. God would have been looking out for you. He wouldn't have been worried about making sure you have a gun so you can get drunk on Sunday night and kill your girlfriend's parents. But let's say it's true. Let's say God gave us these rights. Why would he give us a certain number of rights? The Bill of Rights in this country has 10 stipulations, okay? 10 rights. And apparently God was doing sloppy work that week because we've had to amend the Bill of Rights an additional 17 times. So God forgot a couple of things like slavery. Just f***ing slipped his mind. But let's say God gave us the original 10. He gave the British 13. The British Bill of Rights has 13 stipulations. The Germans have 29. The Belgians have 25. The Swedish have only 6. And some people in the world have no rights at all. What kind of a fucking goddamn God-given deal is that? No rights at all? Why would God give different people in different countries different numbers of different rights? Boredom? Amusement? Bad arithmetic? Do we find out at long last after all this time that God is weak in math skills? Doesn't sound like divine planning to me. Sounds more like human planning. Sounds more like one group trying to control another group. In other words, business as usual in America. Now, if you think you do have rights, one last assignment for you. Next time you're at the computer, get on the internet, go to Wikipedia. When you get to Wikipedia, in the search field for Wikipedia, I want you to type in Japanese Americans 1942, and you'll find out all about your precious fucking rights, okay? All right. You know about it. You know about it. Yeah. In 1942, there were 110,000 Japanese American citizens in good standing, law-abiding people who were thrown into internment camps simply because their parents were born in the wrong country. That's all they did wrong. They had no right to a lawyer, no right to a fair trial, no right to a jury of their peers, no right to due process of any kind. The only right they had, right this way, into the internment camps. Just when these American citizens needed their rights the most, their government took them away. And rights aren't rights if someone can take them away. They're privileges. That's all we've ever had in this country is a bill of temporary privileges. And if you read the news even badly, you know that every year the list gets shorter and shorter and shorter. Sooner or later, the people in this country are going to realize the government does not give a about them. Government doesn't care about you or your children or your rights or your welfare or your safety. It simply doesn't give a about you. It's interested in its own power. That's the only thing, keeping it and expanding it wherever possible. Personally, when it comes to rights, I think one of two things is true. I think either we have unlimited rights or we have no rights at all.
The patron saint of Southpaws, Mr. George Carlin, telling the truth once again. And I tell you what, let's get to some more truth here.
Stop! Hammer time!
Oh yeah, it's hammer time. It is time to drop the hammer on the douchebag of the week. Once again, I don't know how many weeks in a row I've lost count. Our winner this week, the chief twit himself, Elon Musk. He gets the award this week for banning journalists from Twitter. Among those, the guy that we love the most, the guy that tells the truth, Keith Olbermann. So in solidarity, and by the way, the ban didn't last very long because there's been a whole bunch of threats, more specifically from the European Union, and we'll get to that in just a minute here. But Musk has decided to, he's apparently decided that he needs to step back because he issued his own poll a few days ago. 17 million people voted, and he asked the question, should he stay as CEO of Twitter? 57.5% said no, he needs to go. The remaining 42.5% said yes, he should stay. So 42.5% of this country is insane. Absolutely nuts. So Elon, besides banning journalists, he then decided you can't post links to your Facebook account on Twitter or Mastodon or anything like that. Well, then that got quickly reversed because even more people left Twitter. I tell you what, let me get to this story. This is Ryan Brown writing for CNBC. This is dated December 16th. The European Union Friday threatened tech billionaire Elon Musk with sanctions after Twitter removed several journalists to report on him and the social media company. Vera Jourova, the European Commission's vice president for values and transparency, said in a tweet that news of the, quote, arbitrary suspension of journalists on Twitter is worrying, end of quote. Late Thursday, Twitter abruptly suspended several high-profile journalists who cover him, including CNN correspondent Donnie O'Sullivan and New York Times reporter Ryan Mack. He suggested these journalists violated Twitter's policy on doxing or exposing a person's identifiable information. Oh, yeah, really. It comes after the account at Elon Jet, which tracked the location of Musk's private jet using publicly available flight data, was suspended by Twitter. Musk now faces possible sanctions from the European Union. Geruva said, quote, EU's Digital Services Act requires respect of media freedom and fundamental rights. This is reinforced under our Media Freedom Act. Elon Musk should be aware of that. There are red lines and sanctions soon. End of quote. Geruva didn't add any further details on the sanctions. Under the European Union's Digital Services Act, companies can be fined up to 6% of their global annual revenue for breaches. The DSA, which entered into force on November 16th, requires large platforms to reduce harms online, implement protections for user rights, and issue transparency reports. Big tech platforms are required to report the number of active end users they have to the Commission by February 2023. They then have until 4 months after the block completes reviews of the numbers to comply with the rules. Musk has served as Twitter CEO since October after buying the company for $44 billion. The Tesla and SpaceX boss, a self-described free speech absolutist, has troubled politicians and civil liberties activists with steps to restore the accounts of banned users, including Donald Trump, and the laying off of thousands of Twitter employees. And there's even more. This is affecting Musk's other businesses. This is Marco Marceline writing for PC Mag. This is dated December 18th. Tesla's third largest individual shareholder, Colguan Liu, has rounded on Elon Musk, calling for a new CEO to take over the electric vehicle maker and accusing the nascent Twitter CEO of abandoning ship. Leo tweeted on Wednesday, quote, Elon abandoned Tesla and Tesla has no working CEO. Tesla needs and deserves to have a working full-time CEO. End of quote. The Indonesian investor has more than 22 million shares in Tesla, currently worth $3.5 billion. That is according to Autoblog. In a series of tweets, Leo said he would like to see an operational executive similar to Tim Cook take over the company. Leo tweeted, quote, Elon is a mere hired hand. He is our employee. Elon was the proud father. Tesla has grown up. An executioner Tim Cook-like is needed, not Elon. I plan to invest more billions of dollars because Tesla will be the biggest company with or without Elon. End of quote. Leo is not selling his shares, however. He plans to buy more as he believes the stock is undervalued and there's still possibility for growth with a more laser-focused CEO. That is according to a report published by Business Insider. Musk refuted allegations that he's spending too little time on Tesla. He tweeted this week, quote, I literally just finished my meeting going over Giga Texas production progress. End of quote. Still, shares of Tesla are down 55% this year, with Musk having sold $22.9 billion worth of Tesla stock when he revealed his plans to buy Twitter in the spring. So, yeah, this is unsustainable, and I believe other investors have said that, and other pundits in the business section have said this is not sustainable. So there you go, folks. So to Elon Musk, once again this week, we've got this message for you.
Don't be a douchebag.
Yeah, you got that right. I don't think Elon can help himself. I think he's just born a douchebag and grew up to be a bigger one. I want to get to our final story for today. This is Jamie Stengel writing for the Associated Press. This is dated December 20th. A former Texas police officer who fatally shot Atiana Jefferson through a rear window of her home in 2019 was sentenced Tuesday to nearly 12 years in prison for his manslaughter conviction. 38-year-old Aaron Dean had faced up to 20 years in prison, but jurors also had the option of sentencing him to probation. The same jury that convicted him of manslaughter Thursday also determined the sentence, 11 years, 10 months, and 12 days. The white former Fort Worth officer shot the 28-year-old black woman while responding to a call about an open front door. His guilty verdict was a rare conviction of an officer for killing someone who was also armed with a gun. During the trial, the primary dispute was whether Dean knew Jefferson was armed. Dean testified that he saw her weapon. Prosecutors claimed the evidence showed otherwise. Dean shot Jefferson on October 12, 2019, after a neighbor called a non-emergency police line to report that the front door to Jefferson's home was open. She had been playing video games that night with her 8-year-old nephew, Zion Carr, and it emerged at trial that they left the doors open to vent smoke from hamburgers the boy burnt. Zion, who's now 11, was in the room with his aunt when she was shot and testified during the trial. After the sentence was pronounced, one of Jefferson's sisters, Ashley Carr, read a statement in court from herself and another sister, Amber Carr, who is Zion's mother. Amber Carr said Jefferson, who planned to go to medical school, quote, had big dreams and goals, end of quote, and that her son, quote, feels he is responsible to fill the whole role of his aunt and he has the weight of the world on his shoulders, end of quote. Ashley Carr called her sister, quote, a beautiful ray of sunshine. She was in her home, which should have been the safest place for her to be, and yet turned out to be the most dangerous, end of quote. At a news conference held later Tuesday outside of the home where Jefferson was killed, Ashley Carr said the family wanted Dean sentenced to more time, but saw symbolism in the sentence chosen by the jury. She said, quote, 11 years, that's the same age as Zion. 10 months, 12 days, that's the date that it happened. It's a message in this. It might not be the message that we wanted and the whole dream, but it's some of it, end of quote. Attorneys for Dean did not immediately respond to a request for comment from the Associated Press following the sentencing. The case was unusual for the relative speed with which, amid public outrage, the Fort Worth Police Department released video of the shooting and arrested Dean. He completed the police academy the year before and quit the force without speaking to investigators. Since then, the case was repeatedly postponed amid lawyerly wrangling, the terminal illness of Dean's lead attorney, and the COVID-19 pandemic. Body camera footage showed that Dean and a second officer who responded to the call did not identify themselves as police at the house. Dean and Officer Carol Darch testified that they thought the house might have been burglarized and quietly moved into the fenced-off backyard looking for signs of forced entry. There, Dean, whose gun was drawn, fired a single shot through a window a split second after shouting at Jefferson, who was inside, to show her hands. Dean testified that he had no choice when he saw Jefferson pointing the barrel of a gun directly at him. But under questioning from prosecutors, he acknowledged numerous errors, repeatedly conceding that actions he took before and after the shooting were, quote, more bad police work, end of quote. Darch's back was to the window when Dean was shot, but she testified that he never mentioned seeing a gun before he pulled the trigger and didn't say anything about the weapon as they rushed in to search the house. Dean acknowledged on the witness stand that he said something about the gun only after seeing it on the floor inside the house and that he never gave Jefferson first aid. Zion testified that Jefferson took her gun out believing there was an intruder in the backyard, but he offered contradictory accounts of whether she pointed the pistol out the window. On the trial's opening day, he testified that Jefferson always had the gun pointed down, but in an interview that was recorded soon after the shooting and played in court, Zion said she had pointed the weapon at the window. So there you go. And I hope that the prosecutors in Kent County, Michigan, take note of this as Christopher Schur goes to trial for second-degree murder for killing Patrick Lyoya by shooting him in the back of the head. I feel so bad for Zion that he had to witness this. No child should ever have to witness a family member being murdered by a cop. We're just about out of time for this show. Before I go, I want to play one more Carlin clip as our Christmas present to you, the listener. So we'll play the clip of George Carlin explaining who the real owners of the country are. We hope you have a very happy holidays, regardless of what you celebrate, or even if you don't celebrate. On behalf of everyone at Southpaws, Jack Prince, Katie J., and myself, I'm Darren Gibson. Happy holidays. Please support independent media, the First Amendment, and a woman's right to choose.
There's a reason. There's a reason for this. There's a reason education sucks, and it's the same reason that it will never, ever, ever be fixed. It's never going to get any better. Don't look for it. Be happy with what you got. Because the owners of this country don't want that. I'm talking about the real owners now. The real owners, the big wealthy business interests that control things and make all the important decisions. Forget the politicians. The politicians are put there to give you the idea that you have freedom of choice. You don't. You have no choice. You have owners. They own you. They own everything. They own all the important land. They own and control the corporations. They've long since bought and paid for the Senate, the Congress, the state houses, the city halls. They got the judges in their back pockets. And they own all the big media companies, so they control just about all of the news and information you get to hear. They got you by the balls. They spend billions of dollars every year lobbying to get what they want. Well, we know what they want. They want more for themselves and less for everybody else. But I'll tell you what they don't want. They don't want a population of citizens capable of critical thinking. They don't want well-informed, well-educated people capable of critical thinking. They're not interested in that. That doesn't help them. That's against their interest. That's right. They don't want people who are smart enough to sit around the kitchen table and figure out how badly they're getting f***ed by a system that threw them overboard 30 fucking years ago. They don't want that. You know what they want? They want obedient workers. Obedient workers. People who are just smart enough to run the machines and do the paperwork and just dumb enough to passively accept all these increasingly shittier jobs with the lower pay, the longer hours, the reduced benefits, the end of overtime, and the vanishing pension that disappears the minute you go to collect it. And now they're coming for your Social Security money. They want your fucking retirement money. They want it back, so they can give it to their criminal friends on Wall Street. And you know something? They'll get it. They'll get it all from you sooner or later, because they own this fucking place. It's a big club, and you ain't in it. You and I are not in the big club. And by the way, it's the same big club they use to beat you over the head with all day long when they tell you what to believe. All day long, beating you over the head in their media, telling you what to believe, what to think, and what to buy. The table is tilted, folks. The game is rigged. And nobody seems to notice. Nobody seems to care. Good, honest, hard-working people, white collar, blue collar, doesn't matter what color shirt you have on. Good, honest, hard-working people continue. These are people of modest means. Continue to elect these rich suckers who don't give a f*** about them. They don't give a f*** about you. They don't give a f*** about you. They don't care about you at all. At all. At all. Yeah. You know? And nobody seems to notice, nobody seems to care. That's what the owners count on, the fact that Americans will probably remain willfully ignorant of the big red, white, and blue that's being jammed up their assholes every day. Because the owners of this country know the truth. It's called the American dream, because you have to be asleep to believe it.
The stations that carry Southpaws do not necessarily share the opinions expressed on the show. Southpaws is protected by the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution and is copyrighted by Big D Entertainment, all rights reserved.